This message comes from NPR sponsor, FX's The Lowdown, starring Ethan Hawke. This new crime drama follows quirky journalist Lee Raybon, whose obsession with the truth always gets him into trouble. FX's The Lowdown, all new, Tuesdays on FX. Stream on Hulu.
A warning, this episode discusses drugs and drug use.
I think everyone right now is looking for ways to get closer to each other and to loosen up, because this world is so isolating, and especially with the internet, all socialization taking place through the internet or dating apps, or, if you're queer, like Grindr, things like that.
Something's always being mediated. Yeah,
something's always being mediated. So I think in-person interaction has statistically become rarer. But then I think when it does happen, people have this desire to really let loose, get close, and let their guard down. And I think from my reporting, ketamine is a perfect drug for that in a way, because when I talk to a lot of people who take it to go to the club, it's so that they can socialize without feeling anxious or without feeling insecure about themselves. So I think its popularity is almost a reaction to how kind of atomized and isolating our world has become.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we're talking about a club drug that's quickly rising in popularity, the dissociative anesthetic called ketamine. But why might people want to dissociate in the club? Well, we're going to find out with P.E. Moskowitz, journalist and the author of Breaking Awake, a reporter's search for a new life through drugs, which explores our national mental health and drug use crises and considers paths to collective healing.
Thanks for having me.
And Benjamin Breen, Associate Professor of History at UC Santa Cruz, who specializes in the histories of science, medicine, and drugs, and is the author of the book Tripping on Utopia.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm not advocating for recreational drug use, but rather I'm noticing how recreational ketamine use has entered the zeitgeist, from politics to nights out at the club. So for those who don't know, what is ketamine? What are the effects of it? Like, what do people feel when they're on it?
It's classified as a dissociative drug.
Dissociative meaning it distorts perceptions and creates a feeling of detachment, both internally and externally.
Yeah, it's used in many different contexts. So it's used as an anesthetic to put people under, and animals famously.
Right, it was synthesized in a lab. The scientists that made it were looking for a new anesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's also used to enter a K-hole, to kind of go very deep into exploring the boundaries of consciousness. And however, as you mentioned, it's a club drug as well. So it's also something people take to dance to.
It's also a treatment for depression.
I would say the dose you take it seems to correspond a lot to a very different effect, from all the way to completely making you unconscious to a very mild, pleasant feeling.
From what I understand, entering a K-hole or ketamine hole is taking so much of the drug that you can't move or talk anymore. And I also understand that a lot of recreational users aren't necessarily going for that, but it's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure situation.
Yeah, that's been my experience with it. When people take small doses of it, like very small doses, I think it helps loosen people up a bit. But then if you take a larger dose, it has a kind of more trippy effect. You definitely feel on a drug, not just loosened up.
So there are other drugs that are more popular by the numbers: cocaine, cannabis, and psilocybin, aka mushrooms, for example. But in the past 10 years, ketamine has gone from not that common to drug du jour. One study finds that seizures of illicit ketamine grew by 349% between 2017 and 2022. Another study from earlier this year analyzed data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health and found that past year recreational ketamine use increased by 81.8% from 2015 to 2019 and rose another 40% from 2021 to 2022. Now, ketamine is illegal to take when not prescribed by a licensed medical professional. It also has both potential positives and potential negatives. It's a very promising treatment for depression and anxiety, but it's also potentially addictive, and research in animals and humans has shown that chronic use of the drug can impair long-term cognition and may cause urological issues. Also, like most substances, it's potentially fatal in high doses, although the mortality rate is quite small. I've seen a lot of reporting on its use in clinical settings to counter treatment-resistant depression, but I also want to know what's behind the uptick in recreational ketamine use. And is ketamine the drug of our time? We're getting into some of the shifts in culture that might explain its popularity. Technically, ketamine is a dissociative. So I think when a lot of people think of dissociating, when I think of dissociating, I don't know why I'm acting like I don't know her. But when I'm thinking about dissociating, I'm like separating myself from my reality or separating myself from others. I'm wondering, how does that fit in with the kinds of use cases you're talking about, PE, where it's like, if you want to go out with friends, you want to hit the club, you want to stay up late and dance and feel the energy in the bodies of other people.
Right.
Like these are occasions where you might want to connect with others. How does ketamine being a dissociative fit into all that?
Yeah, I think the thing is that I don't know what it does on an exact chemical level, but I think what it often at a low dose does is dissociate your kind of like conscious thinking mind, and that's the mind that tells you to be scared of talking to someone or to, monitor your dance moves so that you aren't acting too silly in the club or whatever. In my experience and from my reporting and, friends I've talked to, the kind of thing that gets dissociated is this hyper-vigilant mind that's always aware of what you're doing and aware of your surroundings.
Just to note, scientists are still puzzling out how exactly ketamine works, but it seems to target several different parts of the brain in different ways. And some studies show it does modulate responses from your amygdala, which is the part of your brain that is involved in fear and anxiety. In terms of social functioning, there is some evidence that ketamine can improve it, though that's mixed. But you're saying in your experience, it's like you're dissociating yourself from like your inner critic.
That's been my experience. And then I think, as Benjamin was saying, it's so dose dependent. When you do a larger dose, then I think you kind of completely dissociate in this way where, in my experience, I've, almost seen my mind from a bird's eye view.
Something I'm really intrigued by, P, is like the framing of ketamine now is almost the opposite of how it was initially portrayed, which is such a good example of how drugs, even though they have this very obvious biological characteristic, they're the same physical thing happening in your brain. Culture overlays onto that and totally changes how we talk about them. Because in the 70s, if we were having this discussion on NPR and talking about this new drug called ketamine, it was in the context of like John C. Lilly, the neuroscientist and dolphin researcher, taking ketamine in an isolation tank. And then he kind of, I would say, invented the concept of a K-hole, like going extremely deep into very high doses of ketamine. He was thinking about intergalactic beings and cosmic entities and imagining his mind is not grounded in a body and just completely going off the deep end in many ways in terms of his own psychology. And he portrayed ketamine as like entirely used to enter into this altered state, which cuts you off from other people. So it's really fascinating that now it's almost the opposite.
Right. The opposite in the sense that PE's been saying that ketamine in low doses can help lower some people's inhibitions and get them to connect, which is also a reason some people like alcohol. But there's been a decline in drinking. We got to talk about that. Gallup reported this year that the percentage of Americans who drink has hit an all-time low at 54%.
From what I've seen amongst friends, people have realized that alcohol, is kind of poison to your body. It gives you hangovers. It's not good for you. That's not to say that ketamine has no drawbacks or anything, but I think people are more willing to experiment with other modifiers of their mood that make them feel less bad the next day, essentially. In addition to, there being fewer kind of negative physical effects compared to alcohol, some people even feel positive next day or even next week effects where, this is the reason it's used in clinics to treat depression is people feel like it lifts a burden off them in some way or makes them feel a little lighter. I've talked to countless people who say, they do ketamine once every few weeks or a few months and then the next week feels much easier for them in some ways.
Right. In a few different small studies, researchers found improved mood lasting at least a few days after taking ketamine for people with treatment-resistant depression.
Right. So I think people are more conscious in general these days of mental health. I also think people's mental health in general statistically is worse these days than it was 20, 30 years ago. This kind of idea of a drug that can lower your inhibitions, but then also contribute to your mental health in some way is very attractive to some people.
Yeah, I mean, as mental health has become more of a concern of people, and as just statistically it's become more likely for people to suffer from mental illnesses that are treated with antidepressant medications or anti-anxiety medications, there's a lot of, I think, well-founded concerns about mixing alcohol with those drugs. And I think ketamine is another drug that famously does not mix well with alcohol. I cannot imagine anyone recommending ketamine mixed with alcohol as a combo because they're going to slow down your breathing. And so that's like an important thing to mention here as a safety issue. And whereas, cocaine was packaged with alcohol in the form of red wine with cocaine in it. And it was used widely by many people in the 19th century.
I bet it was. Oh, my producer Liam is telling me that it was Pope Leo XIII, who was known for being incredibly productive.
That's a different story.
I also think part of the appeal is that it's less long-lasting than many other kind of similar drugs or drugs you would associate with, going out to the club. Ketamine lasts about half an hour.
Of course, how long the effects of ketamine lasts depends on dosage, but typically ketamine users aren't committing to being up until like 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Right, exactly.
It sounds a lot more modular, I suppose,
Yeah.
as opposed to other kinds of drugs that people may use in a club setting where it's like, this is your night, clear your next day.
Yes, exactly.
Coming up, is ketamine the drug of the decade?
It makes sense that ketamine is getting so much more popular right now because I think we kind of live in a dissociative era.
Stick around.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLL&branch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.
This message comes from Capital One. With the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One, you earn unlimited 2% cash back on every purchase and get big purchasing power so your business can spend more and earn more. Stephen, Brandon, and Bruno, the business owners of SandCloud, reinvested their 2% cash back to help build the company's retail presence. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus. Terms apply.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLL&branch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.
This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card has no preset spending limit, so the card's purchasing power can adapt to meet business needs. Plus, the card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase. So the more a business spends, the more miles earned. And when traveling, the Venture X business card grants access to over 1,000 airport lounges. The Venture X business card. What's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
In my mind, different drugs do get associated with different decades or different eras. Like, I think about 60s and 70s. I think about like cannabis and LSD. 80s, like think about cocaine and crack. 90s, heroin and, however, unfortunately, heroin chic. In the aughts and 2010s, I think many people associate those periods with the opioid epidemic. Do you feel like that tracks? And is ketamine, I wonder, perhaps the drug of this decade? The 2020s.
I mean, for me, it makes sense that ketamine is getting so much more popular right now because I think we kind of live in a dissociative era. When you're on your phone 5, 6, 7 hours a day, or when you're just so stressed looking at the news, I think that causes a kind of dissociation in people. They don't feel grounded in reality. They feel a bit like out of it. How many times do you see your friends and you're like, how are you doing? And they're like, well, I don't want to talk about it, right? And I think it makes sense that this drug would come along that kind of provided people this temporary escape, but not only escape, a kind of new perspective on these things. It's not so much about just shutting off your brain. I think ketamine, in my experience, it shifted my perspective. I think whether consciously or not, I think people are drawn to these drugs and these experiences that can help them get out of the sometimes horrible present we're living in and shift their experience and also perspective on it.
What P was saying makes me think about the present as in some ways an age when therapy and therapeutic ways of thinking are moving into other realms of life. The recreational world of drug use has a lot of crossover now with therapeutic uses. It's not as clear of a division, right? People might use something for fun with friends, but also see it as something that could be a therapeutic PTSD treatment or antidepressant.
Right. And I think the way people socialize now, it's not uncommon for me to be with friends hanging out and talking about our traumas, right? And if there's a drug that kind of enables a deeper version of that conversation or a deeper perspective on that conversation, I think it makes sense that would combine with this drug that kind of allows for a therapeutic shift in perspective. I've never gone to a ketamine clinic, although they're increasing in popularity. But
yeah, I have a few friends who've done it.
Yeah, but I've used ketamine purposely for PTSD recreationally with the express purpose of helping alleviate my trauma. You know, I write about in the book a night where I did ketamine with a friend and we listened to a Lady Gaga album and I could see my near-death experience that had led me to have PTSD. And I remember waking up the next morning and feeling this weight off my shoulders. Even though it wasn't in a therapeutic setting, the effect was nonetheless the same, that I felt like I had been helped with my mental health by this substance.
Benjamin, I'm wondering, how does ketamine fit into a larger history of drugs and drug culture?
Yeah, good question, because it's often the case that we talk about drugs in an eternal present, like we're always talking about them like they're brand new and they're just being dropped into our world. But we have to remember that drugs have always been used by pretty much every human society, going back as far as we know to the Neolithic period. So what I find interesting about ketamine is that it's not universal at all, and it's not old. It's really new. So pretty much any drug you care to name, like opioids, for instance, you can go back thousands of years and trace it. Cannabis, psychedelics. But ketamine is, I think, like one of the newest drugs in wide use that is like a household name. MDMA is another one, but MDMA is actually quite a bit older. A lot of these drugs were invented before World War II, and then later, you know, through various testing by drug companies, their actual uses were found. But ketamine was, 1962 is like within, obviously, living memory, right?
Yeah.
It's a brand new drug in that sense. So to your point about the kind of eras of drugs and whether this is the ketamine era, I think you could kind of make a case for it simply because it hasn't had a chance yet to reach a wide audience, and now it is. Whereas, like cocaine, it wasn't just the 1980s was the cocaine era. It was legal in the 19th century, and it was widely used. So a lot of drugs have a very deep history, and ketamine is interesting precisely because it doesn't have a very deep history.
Right.
One last thought. Using ketamine recreationally can, of course, be potentially dangerous. The National Institute for Drug Abuse has cited short-term effects like nausea, difficulty speaking, and numbness, as well as long-term effects like memory problems, gastrointestinal issues, and urological issues, as I mentioned earlier, and at high doses, psychosis. Also, I think we all remember the shocking death of Matthew Perry, who died of, quote, the acute effects of ketamine, though other things like coronary disease, drowning, and buprenorphine were also noted as factors in the autopsy results.
Right.
If people do encounter ketamine outside of a clinical space, what should they know?
I think with any kind of mind-altering substance, in addition to the physical safety precautions you should take, I think it's important to know your intent and to know that this can actually change your brain or change your mind about things. I think a lot of people, when you hear of things like bad trips, right, that people have on whatever drug it may be, often it's that, people don't want to explore the traumas and the perspectives that brings up and that scares them. And you shouldn't force yourself into these experiences where you feel unprepared mentally to deal with whatever comes up. And I think that's true with ketamine too. It's not just something that's going to lower your inhibitions. It might bring your brain to places that you're not ready to go. And I think it's important that if you are going to do it, to have a community around you, to have friends around you, to help you through that so you're not ending up in this dark place alone.
Yeah, just to second that, not doing ketamine alone. I would urge anyone who's experimenting with ketamine, do it with someone else nearby. Have a trip sitter. Don't do it alone. And also test for fentanyl. There's freely available drug testing kits. It's really important that we mention that you need to test this stuff because anything that is a white powder that is obtained illicitly is a potential danger for fentanyl. And so that's really, I think, the biggest thing to be aware of.
And of course, we at NPR are not advocating for drug use, but given that recreational ketamine use is on the rise, I do think it's important to understand why. So Benjamin, P.E., I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
That was P.E. Moskowitz, journalist and the author of Breaking Awake, A Reporter's Search for a New Life Through Drugs, and Benjamin Breen, associate professor of history at UC Santa Cruz and the author of Tripping on Utopia. For deeper reporting on the science behind ketamine, check out the Shortwave podcast from NPR. And you all know I love hearing from you, and I just want to shout out one comment I read this week on our episode about menopause. Spotify user Queen Bean wrote, "Currently enjoying the throes of hot flashes. Freedom! I love it. Started weightlifting with the spouse in May. I'm still getting better at something." Get your gains, Queen Bean. I love your approach to this time in your life, and I honestly hope to have the same. And to everybody else, I love hearing what y'all connect with in these episodes. So wherever you're listening, drop a comment or a review, and you might just hear me shout you out right here on the show. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor 1Password. Secure access to your online world, from emails to banking, so you can protect what matters most with 1Password. For a free 2-week trial, go to 1Password.com/NPR. Support for this podcast and the following message come from Mint Mobile. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no hidden fees. Plans start at $15 a month. Make the switch at mintmobile.com/minute. That's mintmobile.com/minute. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.